Lies of P is hands down one of the greatest Souls-like games ever made. While not developed by FromSoft, makers of the critically acclaimed Dark Souls series, someone not well versed in gaming would have trouble believing that it wasn't. Neowitz Games and Round 8 Studio absolutely nailed everything that this game set out to be. Not since Bloodborne has a specific ambiance and vibe been so realized and brought to life so magnificently as the dilapidated city of Krat. Not since Sekiro has there been such an amazing focus on combat, parrying, and boss difficulty. And not like many other magnificent Souls games has there been such a well-told and thoughtfully paced narrative as the one provided in Lies of P. With all of that praise being said, you've been lied to. From the very moment the game was revealed and the title was scrawled across the screen, you as a viewer and a player have been led astray. You see, Lies of P obviously wants you to think that the character you play as is Pinocchio, the famous puppet brought to life by author Carlo Collodi, and later made even more popular thanks to the Disney animated film. In many ways, up until the epilogue of the game, this could in fact very well be the case. You have a cricket named Jiminy who provides insight and wisdom upon you in moments where you need to make a choice. Characters like Geppetto and the infamous Black Rabbit Brotherhood exist in this universe in almost direct parallels to their book counterparts. Even at a base level, the game itself relies on a very prominent lie and truth system that can determine specific outcomes during your playthrough. And yet, something about Lies of P just felt off, at least as far as the narrative is concerned. Like, I understand that Geppetto constantly refers to you as Carlo, which is a wonderful homage to the author. However, not one character refers to you as Pinocchio, not even Jiminy. There was even mention of a Dorian Gray at one point in the game, and this took me by surprise because that specific character has absolutely nothing to do with Pinocchio and is completely unrelated.
I remember commissioning that piece from an artist named D. Gray. Like all artists, he was eccentric. He claimed that a painting could harbor a living soul. But how can that happen? Just like the fairy tale.
It wasn't until the ending cutscene of the game, in which Dorothy from Wizard of Oz fame made her debut, that I started to reevaluate everything I had done up to that moment. And some things that had happened started to make a bit more sense in retrospect. So I'm simply going to lay this theory on the table. I believe that the main character in Lies of P is in fact not Pinocchio, but rather the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz. I'm going to back this up with what I believe to be some pretty crucial evidence. Starting off, we're going to take a trip down to, well, the main menu of Lies of P. The most obvious and yet so hidden in plain sight aspect of the game is this heart, or the P organ as the game refers to it. Most people familiar with the story of Pinocchio will know that humanity, or rather the quest to becoming a, in quotes, real boy, is the main focus. However, for those who may not be all that familiar with The Wizard of Oz, the Tin Man in that story has a primary objective of trying to acquire, you guessed it, a heart. Hence why he joins Dorothy on her journey in the land of Oz in the first place. Every time you make a choice in Lies of P, you'll get a notification that your heart is doing, well, something. And even the endings of the story, despite what you choose, all revolve around your heart and whether or not you keep it or give it to Geppetto. I found this over-obsession with the heart to be quite odd all the way up until the end. However, with the reveal of Dorothy, my theory that the Tin Man is the character you play as seems a bit more prominent. Next, we're going to talk about something simple. Metal. Krat is undoubtedly going for what one can only describe as a steampunk vibe, so it only makes sense that yourself and most of the enemies you fight are not typical puppets, but rather animatronics with no strings attached. Give one that we will mention shortly. With that being said, this entire story is a work of fiction. It's one of those stories in which you can suspend your disbelief for pretty much anything. I mean, one of the later bosses you fight literally has God's arm sticking out of his back, and I doubt anyone was like, yep, that doesn't fit here. My point being is, why also make the character you play as an animatronic? If he truly was Pinocchio, why not just make him a wooden doll? My grand conspiracy still stands that I believe that this was very intentional because, as I've stated a few times now, I believe that we're playing as the Tin Man, whom is, well, also made of metal. This next part of my theory really didn't hit until my second playthrough, and that is, I believe that Pinocchio is in fact in the game. Towards the end of Lies of P, you have the option to either give Geppetto your heart or refuse. If you refuse, Geppetto will become angry, a cutscene will play, and you will face off against an enemy known as the Nameless Puppet. While I have no solid confirmation that this is Pinocchio, I do know two things as absolute fact. The first is that, well, like I've stated, I believe that we are in fact not Pinocchio, so it only makes sense that Geppetto's creation of Pinocchio still exists, and this puppet you fight was obviously his end goal where he puts your heart, if you do end up giving it to him, indicating a high level of importance. The second reason is the fight itself, which is broken up into two parts. The first phase has Geppetto manually controlling the puppet via these blue strings. Once you manage to break him down in this phase, a cutscene will play where you sever the puppet's head and the strings that were controlling him break and turn red. At this point, the nameless puppet will go into a frenzy, yet still attack you and even try to destroy the heart that was meant to be his inside of you. These actions not only indicate free will, but also symbolize how this creation is no longer in Geppetto's control at this point. The second time I played this, I almost laughed out loud because this moment is literally immortalized in the Disney movie Pinocchio with the song No Strings on Me. Also, why not simply give the puppet a name? Neowitz could have easily slapped a name on this guy and none would have been the wiser. However, they made this an intentional choice by referring to him as the nameless puppet, one I believe made to further deceive the player into thinking that you are still Pinocchio. My last bit of evidence as to why I believe the character you play as is the Tin Man and not Pinocchio doesn't come from Pinocchio lore, but rather that of the Wizard of Oz. You see, one thing I couldn't wrap my head around was why in Lies of P you had a mechanical arm. Sure, one could simply argue that this is nothing more than a necessary choice made to enhance the gameplay, but if that was the case, why not just make it a glove or a piece of armor? Well, I did some digging and discovered that in many renditions of the story of the Wizard of Oz, the Tin Man was previously a lumberjack. He carries an axe that can even be seen in the 1939 movie, and according to the lore, it was enchanted by the Wicked Witch of the East to chop off his limbs, hence how he became the Tin Man in the first place. While I don't believe that this is a specific story that the devs envisioned for our character, none can argue the correlation between our character and the Tin Man, both of whom are missing limbs at some point. So there you have it. This is my theory as to why I believe that the character you play as is the Tin Man and not Pinocchio. The specific reveal of Dorothy of all characters in the end credits scene backs this. The fact that Geppetto mentions Dorian Gray links to the possibility of other Fable characters being present in this world as well, not just limited to those of the story of Pinocchio. Even the developers have all but confirmed DLC for this game in a response to IGN where they announced that they did not have an official statement regarding upcoming DLC for Lies of P. However, the studio referred us to a recent blog post which notes that they will be providing a roadmap of content planned for Lies of P as soon as it's ready. And while this in itself is a video for the future, all I can say is that I believe Neowitz is building a Souls universe in the world of Fable characters similar to that of The Wolf Among Us. I believe that we will eventually have a Souls game where we are in Oz with Dorothy making our way to the Emerald City, and I believe that we are the Tin Man and will accompany her on this eventual journey, or whatever dark and twisted version Neowitz decides to cook up. If you liked the video or have any insight that I may have missed, please leave a like and a comment. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
I never found you in grand covenant with the other puppets because of Carlo and Nemo within you. I knew you had gone astray. Troublesome little puppet.